"If you can't communicate your order, maybe stay home, Grandma." That's what one man shouted as the deaf veteran struggled with her notepad. People snickered. One waitress looked away. The old woman just kept writing, hands trembling but determined. But in the far corner, a woman in naval uniform stood up. No speeches, no confrontation, just a single silent action that made the entire restaurant fall quiet. If you believe respect doesn't need words to be heard, comment "Stand with her" below. Eleanor Phillips, 68, arrived at Peterson's family restaurant precisely at 9:15 a.m., just as she had every Sunday for the past decade. The retired Navy communications specialist moved slowly, each step reflecting the spinal damage she'd sustained during a shipboard fire in the Persian Gulf War. Doctors had said she'd never walk again. Ellie had other plans. Today, like all days, she relied on her metal cane, its handle worn smooth from years of use. She nodded to Sophia, the hostess who knew her order by heart. Black coffee, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, no butter. Ellie pointed to her usual order on the laminated menu, then gestured toward the self-service counter. Despite her disabilities, both her deafness from the explosion and her mobility issues, carrying her own tray was difficult but vital. For military personnel like her, independence wasn't just a preference, it was identity. She carefully propped her cane against the counter, steadied herself, and gripped the tray with both weathered hands. The journey across the busy restaurant was slow, deliberate, each step calculated to keep the coffee from spilling. Ellie's eyes, still sharp despite her 70 years, focused entirely on her destination. The window booth where morning light would warm her aching back. From a corner table, for men in matching company polo shirts watched her halting progress. Corporate types attending some nearby conference, drinking mimosas despite the early hour. "Look at this one," one muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Takes forever to cross a room." Ellie continued her careful journey, seemingly oblivious to their comments. Her hearing aids had been abandoned years ago. They couldn't restore what the explosion had taken, but she could read lips, a skill honed through necessity, and she caught enough of their words from their reflected faces in the glass dividers. She'd grown accustomed to such remarks. 22 years in the Navy, rising from communications specialist to senior officer despite being one of the few women in her division, had taught her when to fight and when to simply move forward with dignity intact. Sophia, who had served Ellie for years, hesitated by the kitchen door, coffee pot in hand. She'd seen the corporate men smirking, had heard enough to make her uncomfortable, but the Sunday morning rush left little time for intervention. Ellie's gray hair, cut short in a style she'd maintained since her service days, caught the morning light as she finally reached her booth. She began the careful choreography of setting down her tray while maintaining her balance. Her hand trembled slightly, more from age than awareness of the onlookers, and a spoon slipped from the tray, clattering to the floor beside her booth. No one moved to help. Ellie paused, considering the fallen utensil and the considerable effort it would take to retrieve it. As she began the painful process of lowering herself, bracing against the table edge, the man directly behind her snorted. "I'd help, but I don't speak sign language," he said, making exaggerated hand gestures that bore no resemblance to actual ASL. His colleagues laughed, their corporate badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. The mockery landed like a physical blow, yet Ellie's face betrayed nothing. Decades of military discipline had taught her to weather far worse than ridicule. She continued her slow descent toward the spoon, dignity intact despite the pain etched across her weathered face. Sophia finally approached, having witnessed enough. She quickly retrieved the fallen utensil and placed a clean one on Ellie's table. "I'm sorry about that, Miss Phillips," she whispered, forgetting momentarily that Ellie couldn't hear her. Realizing her mistake, she touched her heart and motioned toward the men with a disapproving glance. Ellie nodded once, pulled out her small notepad, her constant companion since losing her hearing, and wrote, "Not your fault, Sophia." She tore off the page and handed it to the young waitress. She settled into her seat, arranging her napkin across her lap with the precise movements of someone who had spent decades in uniform. Her weathered hands methodically prepared her breakfast the same way they had every Sunday since she'd first walked through Peterson's doors. The laughter from the corporate table continued. Quieter now, but still pointed, designed to reach nearby tables without being overtly disruptive enough for staff intervention. Probably never even served, one said to his companions. That generation just loves playing the veteran card for attention. Ellie cut into her eggs with steady determination. The slight shake in her hand was the only indication that she caught some of their words from their reflected faces in a window. The Gulf War had taught her that survival sometimes meant focusing solely on the immediate task, whether securing communications during an attack or simply cutting her breakfast into manageable bites. What no one in the restaurant had noticed was the woman sitting in the far corner booth, dressed in a pristine naval uniform with admiral stars on her shoulders. She had observed the entire interaction. Her coffee sat untouched, her meal uneaten, her attention entirely focused on Ellie and the men mocking her. Admiral Victoria Hayes, 52, had stopped for breakfast before her drive to Washington for a Pentagon briefing. With 28 years of naval service, she had the kind of commanding presence that didn't require volume. She had noticed Ellie immediately. Military personnel often recognize each other, even across generations. The Admiral had watched the scene unfold with growing tension, her jaw tightening with each snide comment. When the spoon fell and no one moved to help, something shifted in her expression, a decision being made. One of the men at the corporate table finally noticed the Admiral's unwavering stare. Perhaps feeling emboldened by his colleagues or the morning mimosas, he called out, "Hey, Navy, want to translate for your friend? Or is your uniform just for show too?" Conversations faltered as the confrontation grew more direct. Ellie continued eating, seemingly oblivious, though the slight stiffening of her shoulders suggested otherwise. Admiral Hayes stood slowly. Her movement was unhurried but deliberate, the kind of measured control that suggested far more authority than any rushed reaction. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform immaculate, each medal and ribbon telling its own story of service and sacrifice. Without acknowledging the hecklers, she walked directly to Ellie's table. The restaurant quieted as people noticed her rank and the purposeful way she moved across the room. Even the kitchen staff paused, sensing something significant was about to happen. Admiral Hayes didn't speak. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't create a scene. Instead, she bent down and picked up the fallen spoon that still lay on the floor. She placed it gently on the edge of Ellie's table, then took a step back and stood, not beside the booth, but directly behind Ellie's seat. Her posture shifted automatically to the formal position of attention, hands at her sides, feet at a precise angle, eyes forward. The ramrod straight stance of a sailor rendering honor. The restaurant fell completely silent. It was a simple act, a naval officer standing at attention behind a seated veteran, but the message required no explanation to anyone watching. This woman deserves respect, and I stand with her. Ellie glanced up, catching the Admiral's reflection in the window beside her booth. A flash of recognition passed between them. The unspoken sisterhood of women who had worn the uniform and faced battles both on and off the battlefield. One of the waiters stopped mid-step, coffee pot still tilted over a customer's cup. The hostess at the front counter straightened instinctively, responding to the sudden shift in atmosphere. The men at the corporate table fell silent, their smirks fading as they registered not just the Admiral's rank, but the unmistakable seriousness of her posture. For 30 seconds, no one in Peterson's restaurant spoke. No silverware clinked against plates. No coffee cups returned to saucers. Just the sound of the kitchen fan and the distant traffic outside. Admiral Hayes remained at attention, a living statue of dignity guarding an elder warrior's meal. An older couple at a nearby table quietly stood as well, the husband, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, assuming the same position of respect. Then, remarkably, a young man from another table stood too, though he wore civilian clothes. His posture revealed his military background. One by one, several others throughout the restaurant rose. Not everyone, but enough to transform the moment from a gesture into a statement. If you ever needed someone to speak for you, sometimes they just need to stand. Comment respect. If you believe honor still walks into rooms quietly, after what seemed like an eternity of silence, Admiral Hayes finally shifted her stance. She remained standing but turned to face the corporate table. Her expression wasn't angry but resolute. She reached into the breast pocket of her uniform and removed a weathered photograph protected in a clear plastic sleeve. Without speaking, she held it up for everyone to see. The photograph, yellow with age, showed a much younger Eleanor Phillips in naval combat, gear aboard what appeared to be a warship. Her face was streaked with soot, her hands busy at a communications panel amid what was clearly emergency conditions. Smoke filled the background, and injured sailors were visible behind her. This woman, the Admiral finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the silent restaurant, maintained critical communications during the USS Princeton mine strike in 1991, despite being severely injured herself. She lowered the photograph slightly, making direct eye contact with the men who had been mocking Ellie. Senior Chief Phillips lost her hearing that day, staying at her post even as the compartment filled with smoke and flames. She coordinated rescue operations that saved 27 sailors, including me, a junior lieutenant trapped below deck. Ellie continued eating, her focus on her plate, though her hand had still on her fork. This was not a story she had shared with the staff at Peterson's, not out of modesty, but because some memories belonged to the past. She couldn't hear the orders anymore, but she read lips and kept working. When the backup power failed, she used hand signals and written notes to keep information flowing. When evacuation was ordered, she refused to leave until everyone else was accounted for. The Admiral placed the photograph gently on Ellie's table. She didn't just lose her hearing that day. She suffered spinal injuries carrying 2 injured sailors to safety. Doctors said she'd never walk again. The corporate table had gone completely still. One man's face had drained of color as the implications of their mockery became clear. We didn't know," he stammered. "You didn't ask," the Admiral replied simply. No accusation or tone, just quiet certainty. She turned toward Sophia, who stood frozen with her coffee pot. "I'd like to cover Senior Chief Phillips' meal today." Then, raising her voice slightly to address the entire staff, she added, "And I'd like everyone here to know that this restaurant now stands under her protection, at least as far as the United States Navy is concerned." From the back of the restaurant, a door opened. George Peterson, the owner and namesake of the establishment, emerged from his office. The older man's expression suggested he had been watching the scene unfold to the security monitors in the back. "I saw everything," he said, approaching Ellie's table. "And I'd like to ask your permission for something, Senior Chief Phillips." Ellie finally looked up, her weathered face revealing nothing of her thoughts. She took out her notepad, raised an eyebrow in question. Peterson continued, gesturing to the window seat, where Ellie had eaten every Sunday for over a decade. "I'd like to name this booth after you, officially, if that's all right with you, Senior Chief." For the first time since entering the restaurant, Ellie's expression softened slightly. She wrote on her pad, "No need for that, George." "There's every need," Peterson insisted, glancing around at his silent customers. Some lessons are worth making permanent. The corporate table had fallen completely silent. The men who had been so vocal minutes earlier now staring into their drinks, the weight of the Admiral's revelation and their own behavior settling heavily upon them. Peterson turned to address them directly. "Gentlemen, I think it's time you settled your bill." One of them, the one who had made the sign language mockery, stood up awkwardly. "Ma'am," he addressed Ellie directly, "we owe you an apology." Ellie studied him for a moment, then simply nodded once, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology, just acknowledging it had been offered. As the men paid their bill and left, conversations gradually resumed throughout the restaurant, though notably subdued. Several customers nodded respectfully toward Ellie's booth as they passed. An elderly woman stopped to touch her shoulder gently before leaving. 1 week later, Ellie arrived at Peterson's for her usual Sunday breakfast. As she entered, she noticed something different. Above her regular booth, a small brass plaque had been installed, polished to a high shine, reading, "Reserved for Senior Chief Eleanor Phillips, USN Ret." Still standing. Beneath it hung a framed copy of the photograph Admiral Hayes had shown. Ellie at her communications station amidst the chaos of battle. George must have arranged to get a copy. As Ellie made her way to her seat, she noticed the same group of men from the previous Sunday sitting quietly at a table near the counter. When they saw her, they stood, not mockingly, but with genuine regret. The one who had been most vocal approached cautiously. He had prepared a note, which he handed to her. Senior Chief Phillips, the note read, "We came back to apologize properly. What we did was unforgivable." Ellie studied them for a moment in their corporate attire. They looked younger somehow, less intimidating than they had tried to appear the previous week. She took out her notepad and wrote, "You already apologized." "Not properly," the man insisted, speaking slowly so she could read his lips. "My sister serves in the Navy. She'd be ashamed of what I did." Ellie nodded once, then wrote something that surprised everyone reading over her shoulder. "Next time sit with me before you judge me. You might learn something worth knowing." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was an opening, an invitation to bridge a gap rather than widen it. As Ellie settled into her booth, the door opened again. Admiral Hayes entered, now in civilian clothes, but carrying herself with the same military bearing. She nodded at Ellie, then took a seat 2 booths away, close enough to acknowledge their connection, but not presuming a familiarity they hadn't established. Ellie caught her eye and gestured to the empty seat across from her. The Admiral accepted the invitation with a small nod of thanks. Sophia approached their table, now wearing a small Navy pin on her apron, a gift from Ellie given to her after the previous Sunday's events. She had served the older woman for years without knowing her story. Now that she did, she wore the symbol with pride. In the weeks that followed, a new Sunday tradition emerged at Peterson's restaurant. Ellie's booth was always reserved for her, but rarely did she sit alone. Sometimes Admiral Hayes joined her when in town. Other veterans from the area began to stop by. Every Sunday, that booth was full, not just of food, but with stories told through notepads, sign language, and the patient listening of those who understood that some of the most important things in life are communicated without words. The photograph on the wall became a conversation piece. Young sailors from a nearby base would stop to look at it, sometimes leaving notes of thanks for Ellie. Children would ask their parents about it, leading to quiet lessons about service and sacrifice. George Peterson added a small wooden stand on Ellie's table with notepads and pens, making it easier for her to communicate with those who didn't know sign language. But over time, many of the regular staff and customers began learning basic ASL. Simple phrases like, "Good morning," "Thank you," and "It's an honor." Ellie never spoke about that Sunday when the restaurant fell silent. She didn't need to. The stillness had said everything necessary about respect, about dignity, about the power of standing up without saying a word. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up for another person without saying a word? Those quiet moments of respect often speak louder than any argument. Share your story in the comments below. When was the last time you judged someone before knowing their full story? We've all done it, and we've all had the opportunity to make it right. If this veteran's quiet dignity touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about everyday heroes who teach us that sometimes the most powerful statement is simply standing your ground with dignity. Because respect doesn't always need words. Sometimes it just needs witnesses.